now that we know ISO, now we have shutter, okay? And shutter is just like this. And all this shutter, right? This is a 35 millimeter camera, and the shutter opens like this, and the shutter kind of goes up like this, or down, and it leaves this space open, okay? Now this basically means how long is this open. So think of this as an eye. It's if I blink an eye, right? I blink, close the eye, open the eye, get light in my eye, close the eye. So if I blink fast, there's less light that went into my eye. If I blink slow, more light, right? And that is shutter speed, okay? So the cool thing about shutter speed is now we have another trick to our game, how we want to treat ourselves to exposure, right? Because we just add it to our bag of tricks. Like, aha, I got ISO. You bastards, I can make that happen. With my eyes, spin that sucker where I want it. Now I just got another trick in my bag, right? Shutter speed. So let's all intents and purposes, we have 15, 30, 60, 120, 250, 500, right? All right, so 500 to 250, okay? If there's one little box of light, you're gonna get a whole nother box of light, okay? But now at 250, if this is now what we call a unit of light, right? Just say call it a unit of light, 250. Now we're gonna open up to 120. Now we're gonna let those two boxes of light, and it's actually gonna do this, right? Even more light in, okay? And the same thing with 60 all the way up. So you're always doubling the amount of light. So I'm doubling this. So when I go to 60, right, which is a lower shutter speed, 120, 60, right? I'm doubling the light. So if I'm doubling the amount of light, if these are my boxes, I'm gonna have 8 boxes of light, right? Because I'm doubling it every time I'm opening the light. So here's 1x, right? Then I get 2, right? And then I'm gonna double it again, 2 times 2, you're gonna get all this over here, 4 units, right? And then 4 units again, I'm gonna get 8 units of light, right? And then what do you think this is gonna be? 16, I'm not gonna draw the boxes, right? 16 boxes, 32, right? All right, and all that because of speed, right? So now we know that every time this number goes up, we're letting in double the amount of light, right? Okay, so why is that important? Because it's way cool because it's important. Because A, it's a tool in our exposure arsenal, but the cool thing is if I'm shooting a guy on a bike, right? There's a guy on a bike, right? He's got his little tube here, and he's got like a down and down, and he's going really fast, and I can't draw because I'm a photographer or whatever. And his wind's going back, and he's got long hair, super speedy, right? And he's going this way. I want to stop that action with my camera, right? Shutter speed will stop the action, right? So you got these spokes going right here, right? So at 500th of a second, you're gonna stop that bike. You're gonna see a little blur on the pedals and on the tires a little bit, but for the most part, you're gonna stop the action, right? You can go 500, you can take that, do it again, go up to 1,000, cut the light again, right? Cut the light again, right? Hell, cut the light again. You have all these numbers in your camera. So at 4,000ths of a second, this dude is tack sharp, right? Because you stop the action, tack sharp. But because maybe you want to have a little motion, because remember, I'm giving you the tools and the understanding so you can be in charge of the camera, and I just tell, oh, look at sports, let me dial a number. The guy running, let me just, that's it, I'll just keep on that setting. Screw that shit, right? Don't do it. You are the photographer, you make the decisions, right? And you might want to experiment. You might find out that 250 or 120 handheld, pretty much he's good to go. He's kind of sharp, everything else is a little blurry, but it gives all that cool little motion to it. That might be just the perfect exposure, right? Or maybe on a football field and I'm shooting, you know, dudes on the football field, one right after the other, right? And they have a big tackle and they're all going pushing hands. I'm doing it for mom because she hired me to do football, that's a horrible drawing. But 500th of a second because mom wants to see the kid's face sharp, right? All right. So now we have this camera here, figured out. So even this camera here, from way back when, all right, and this is great because I haven't taken this lens off and I don't know. I actually never taken this lens off. So maybe this, hold on here. Right, I know. I think it might be. I think it's just super old. All right, that's all right. I got another camera. So when you get a camera, it's like this, right, without the lens. All right, this is the body, right? So in this body, the two things you can control: ISO, shutter speed. That's it. That's it. Throw it out. That was my main camera. I would really throw it. My main camera. So now, what comes next? The lens. So guess what? We're adding another tool to the tool bag that would actually make everything work. So what we're gonna do now is talk about the lens. All right. So now you know what shutter speed does, which is cool. All right. Okay. And then I'm gonna talk about flash sync when it comes to strobe. There's another thing that shutter speed needs to happen too, but I'm gonna save that for the strobe. All right, so now we have shutter speed. Yay, shutter speed. Now we have aperture, all right? Now, the word f-stop actually comes from a Latin word named something. I looked it up, it's pretty cool. It's like fra, whatever. Anyways, I didn't retain that, but that's okay, I retain all this. So, aperture, right? So let's just start with 1.4, all right? And I'm just gonna do 2.8, 4.0, 5.6, 8, 11, 16, 22, okay. All right, so from the dawn of time, ever since photography came out, believe it or not, it was aperture before shutter speed. The early days of camera, there was no shutter speed. The guy had a lens cap, and the dude just took the lens cap, and he had dialed in the aperture, and he took the lens cap off, and I guess, yeah, that's about right. Put the lens cap back on. That's how old day exposures happen, right? So you have aperture. 1, 4, 2, 8, 4, 5, 6, 8, 11, 16, 22. So here's the deal. Every single lens you're gonna buy is honestly gonna have all these f-stops. Rarely will you have a 1.0 lens. Sometimes you'll have a 32 lens. But in the world of DSLR, this is where you're gonna live. This goes all the way up to 6496 if you have an 8x10 view camera, which nobody does. So, those are the cool things. All right, sorry about the phone call. Anyways, let's talk about aperture, right? All right, so for my studio audience here, which one of these do you think is a big opening, the biggest opening, and the smallest opening? That's correct. So 1.4, this is the aperture, right? And then 2.8, this is the aperture. And this is obviously not to scale. 4, 5, 6, 8, 11, 16, 22, 32. All right, so if you look at the way I have this, right, check this out, okay? Way a lot of light, hardly any light. Now there's pros and cons to this. Just like shutter speed has, we can stop the action or we can blur the action, right? Oh, and let me come back to shutter speed for a second. So you have a focal length of lens. Let's just say this is a 50 millimeter. I gotta talk about that too. Okay, so you have a 50 millimeter lens, okay? And you have a 24 millimeter lens, and maybe you have a 100 millimeter lens, okay? So in the world of 50 millimeter lens, on a 35 millimeter full frame camera, that is what the human eye sees, all right? 50 millimeter lens, that's kind of what it sees right here. So when you go 24, you cut it in half, it sees wider. You go bigger than 50, it sees more narrower, 100, right? So this is really angle of view. So if this is your eye, angle of view, angle of view, angle of view, right? Okay? Now, we'll come back to that in a second. All those lenses still have the aperture, right? And depending on what kind of lens you use, the aperture has a bigger effect on that lens and how it kind of sees, right? So at 1.4, you're gonna let a lot of light in, At 32, you're gonna allow less light in. But just like shutter speed could stop action, blur action, like you should not hand hold a shutter speed of 1 second. Try it. It'll be blurry, it won't be sharp, right? So what we have to think about this is how aperture relates to shutter speed, relates to ISO. So we're not there yet, but here's what 1.4 will give you. So something called DOF, right? Depth of field, right? Or depth of focus, right? So a shallow depth of field, you know, is completely equivalent to how wide your aperture is. So how open it is, right? So if I take this 1.4 right here, my focus, if this is a straight line right here, everything in focus would be like only that, in between those two straight lines at 1.4. At f32, all this would be in focus, right? Just given the plane, if this was like somebody far away, right? Here's a person standing and here's another person standing, right? So we know that 1.4 to 32, we have more things in focus, less things in focus, right? All right, now, this takes me to, let me follow my notes here. Okay, so if I'm gonna shoot a portrait, okay, we're gonna portrait, right? And I wanna have a blurry background, I wanna get a 2.8 or a 1.4. Because, why is it blurry? Because the only thing in focus is the subject, right? All right, now let's say I wanna see what's in the background. I'm not gonna move anything, I'm just gonna maybe shoot at f8 or f11. Now I see the background, right? And it's up to you as a photographer, whether it's pleasing or not pleasing. But now there's something on all lenses, right? When you shoot up here, 1.4, if you don't have like super high end glass, the edges are gonna be a little bit more blurry, right? Anomalies are gonna happen in the lens, just where the glass is in diffraction. You shoot way down here, you start having distortion as well, right? So I like to call the middle of the lens. So if I'm doing product photography, I'm gonna shoot in the middle of the lens right here, right? That's the middle. We're not wide open, we're not super tight, all day long. I get good focus, middle, it's the sharpest that the lens is gonna be. We're gonna hold it up in the middle, right? And now we have some tools. So now we have shutter speed, and then we have lenses. So 50, 24, 100, 200, wide angle lens, and all have different characteristics. So the longer the lens, the shallower the depth of field. So if I have a 400 millimeter lens, no matter what I do, I can never have somebody at 8 feet and 100 feet in focus. 400 millimeter lens in focus, right? This way and that way, 8 feet to 100, never ever will happen, ever, right? But the minute I shoot the same scene on a 24, it'll happen, but you're gonna see everything, right? So that's what lens selection comes in. And I would just recommend shooting 50, 24, 100. If you got that in your bag, you're good. And then you'll really see a difference with the 50, 1.4, and 2.8 in primes. Usually your kit lenses are gonna start at 4, 5, 6, so you're not gonna see that soft focus as much as primes, but it'll still be there in full frame. If you're gonna handheld, and again, you're not really shaky, is your shutter speed should be the same or more than your lens millimeter. What do I mean by that? Crap, man, I'm outside, I'm gonna shoot, and this is before image stabilization, okay? Old school dude here, old man here, right? If I was on a 50 millimeter lens, there's no way I'm going below a 60. No way. I'd be chancing it on a 30, I'd be super still, right? So if I'm gonna photograph something, I'm not gonna drop it below 60, right? At 24 millimeter, all day long. At a 14 millimeter, no problem. At an 8 millimeter, no problem, 4IS, right? Guess what? I got a 200 millimeter lens. I got a 200 millimeter lens. What shutter speed am I not gonna go under? 250, right? So it's rule of thumb, before IS. Now you can do it differently, right? But if you start with the rule of thumb, you know where you're at, the IS will definitely help you out, right? So just something to keep in mind. All right, now we're gonna do a couple exposure equivalent stuff. So we know shutter controls action and how sharp something is. The human body moves between 120 and 60. So if you're gonna try to stop a human body, that's not just sitting really still, you're gonna be 60 to 120, all right? If they're still 30th, but then you're kind of still pushing it, right? If they're playing sports, 500, right? Baseball, 1,000, right? Around freeze that ball. And when you shoot sports, any sports with a ball, you have no shot if you don't have the ball in the picture. So just accept that. All right, now, we talked about ISO and how that relates to exposure. We talked about shutter, how that relates to exposure. We talked about f-stop, how that relates to exposure. We talked about some of the millimeter lenses and how that sees. Crash course is going good.